So about 2 months ago, we did an episode about fanboy backlash against a slate of various diversity-minded new characters Marvel Comics have been pushing at the forefront of their latest variation on the all-new, all-different marketing cycle, wherein my takeaway was that Marvel, in its present-day incarnation as a billion-dollar entertainment corporation arm of the staggeringly massive Walt Disney Empire, which also happens to operate a modestly profitable comic book publishing company ain't that adorable, was likely not all that concerned about angry old-school fans or the sometimes erratic sales data they like to point to as proof of their righteousness, because their real focus was on workshopping characters and storylines for future movies and TV shows. What should have been implicit in that summation, however, was that the fact of Marvel being at this point in the business of building and managing copyrighted characters as multimedia brands, with comics as only one relatively small part of that equation, cuts in both directions, i.e. a company that doesn't really care about the concerns of old-school fans, because business is business, also doesn't really care about the concerns of whatever new fans have been drawn in by many of these new characters, i.e. whether or not they'd actually stick around and remain prominent. And since everything is different, no, everything's back to normal, now it's different again, no it's not, is the Marvel story cycle version of DC's endless unmaking and remaking of the multiverse, i.e. the only thing that sells comics is big events and you have to keep doing them, the last few years of hey, check out all this fresh diversity will apparently now segue into a few years of hey, isn't tradition awesome, presumably set to begin with the upcoming Generations event, hey, just in time for a new Avengers movie, how about that, with Marvel's VP of Sales David Gabriel giving the whole maybe we did get a little too far away from our core fanbase marketing wank off the rub with some choice quotes at a retailer summit, which he then immediately had to walk back in an ICV2 interview to reassure fans that an event-driven refocusing on retro throwback characters didn't mean they were going to just outright junk acclaimed new stuff like Miss Marvel, Squirrel Girl, Spider-Gwen, Moon Girl, etc. The fact of the matter is, cynical, it's about the fans, honest, marketing drivel isn't especially interesting to me regardless of who's being pandered to in each particular instance. What is interesting is watching Marvel, the publisher, and comics fandom in general, still continuing to struggle with how long and convoluted the development process can be, i.e. creating and building up diverse characters in this medium. Case in point, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more prominent or positively thought-of black Marvel superhero than Luke Cage, a character who's been headlining high-profile storylines and team-ups for a lot of the last 2 decades, now has his own Netflix series plus a crossover as a member of the Defenders on the way, and is widely beloved by both traditional superhero fandom and pop culture critics who've admired the socially conscious storytelling that often surrounds him. A model, in other words, of successful superhero diversification. And it only took about 40 fucking years for him to get to that point. Oh, by the way, comics are weird! No, but really, this is worth keeping in mind. If you mainly know Luke Cage from the last decade or so of stories in the comics, the TV show, and his now carefully finessed status as the ubiquitous African-American Marvel superhero, sorry Wes, up to and including the fact that he's been around since the 70s, you might assume he's been as storied and long-respected a character as Spider-Man or the Hulk or at least Hawkeye, and that's the image Marvel wants the popular culture to have. Luke Cage, our best friend, who's been welcome and valued a member of the team for many, many years. But the fact is, during Luke Cage's 40-plus years of existence in Marvel continuity, he spent huge stretches of time pushed to the margins by a publisher that couldn't quite decide what to do with him, or shoved out of sight completely by a fanbase that frequently wanted to treat him like an embarrassment. Hard to imagine now, but yeah, very much the case. You have to remember that Luke Cage was born not just out of a drive to create a broader spectrum of characters, though that was definitely part of it, but Marvel's push to get in on a cultural wave primarily existing in movies of the early 70s that we today recall under the banner term blaxploitation. But while the long-standing influence and impressively huge long-term cultural importance of the so-called blaxploitation movement is today undeniable, it's easy to forget that its initial moment only lasted a few short years in the decade and was never fully re-embraced by the mainstream culture, especially since it was hard for any so-called cult movie to truly take hold in the age before home video. So when the blaxploitation trend's brief initial popularity faded, so did sales for characters meant to cash in on it like Luke Cage, though Marvel made an effort to preserve the character for several more years by collapsing his book and the similarly declining in popularity Iron Fist series, because kung fu movies didn't stay trendy either, into a single new team-up book that ran with modest success into the mid-1980s, helped out by some cameo turns in Frank Miller's concurrent mega-popular Daredevil series. But once that series ended, Marvel had pretty much zero idea what they were supposed to do with Luke Cage. The problem was that however much the approach to writing the character had changed over the years, in the cultural psyche, Cage was forever married to the blaxploitation motif itself, which had come to be regarded as fodder for jokes and unflattering connections to other out-of-date 1970s fashion and musical trends by mainstream audiences. And while Black American culture continued to engage the movement's legacy in more nuanced terms, grappling with the politics of respectability versus visibility, i.e. Robert Townsend's Hollywood Shuffle positing the genre as the ultimate symbol of selling out, while the Wayans family's I'm Gonna Get You Sucker alternately celebrated the genre however tongue-in-cheek. But in the world of comics fandom, that kind of nuance was sadly lacking, largely absent from regular appearances throughout the 80s and into the 90s, save for a few mostly unsuccessful attempts to relaunch his solo series. The go-to opinion for in-the-know comics fans of the era was that Luke Cage was kind of a joke, a punchline wielded to mock stereotypical black characters of comics past, and often simultaneously argue against the need for more characters in comics present. Funny how that works out. The groundbreaking black-owned Milestone Comics universe even featured featured a supporting character in the Icon series called Buck Wild Mercenary Man, specifically created to mock Luke Cage as a stand-in for everything wrong with black heroes from mainstream comics publishers, though the character's eventual death storyline from Dwayne McDuffie did manage to wrap up on a note of appreciating the problematic older characters for being trailblazers in their own way. Even when Luke Cage made what's now considered his comeback as a surprise guest star opposite Jessica Jones in the original early 2000s Alias book, it was in a persona largely stripped of his earlier character-specific signifiers, and Marvel's initial attempts to capitalize on said comeback in that same era were, let's call it, ill-advised, at least. Ironically, what they seemed to miss was that the blaxploitation genre label that they've been forcing Cage to run away from for decades had itself been undergoing a broad critical reappraisal in the wider popular culture, with documentaries like Badass Cinema and tribute films like the comedy Undercover Brother placing renewed focus on the positive and representational aspects of such characters in the films they appeared in. Whether that shift in the cultural attitude was part of the impetus or not, it was Cage's continued appearance as part of the Alias, Pulse, etc. supporting cast, and his eventual drafting into the New Avengers, where the gradual evolution merging his original characterization with more modern sensibilities took place, eventually coalescing over a decade or so into the character who's now finally one of Marvel's most prized multimedia franchise characters. The point? Sometimes these things take time. It can be a long, bizarre, often contradictory road to get there, so don't be too quick to write off this or that idea on the first approach, or assume that you'll never hear from it again, especially in this ridiculous business. Hey gang, here's a question that keeps coming up. If your handle is moviebob, where are your movie reviews? Well, my old reviews are in a lot of places. You'll find many of them on my YouTube channel, but you'll find the brand new ones on Geek.com, an awesome site that's also your one-stop news source for science, TV, gaming, technology, nerd culture, the works. You can find all my reviews directly by going to geek.com/author/bchipman, because that's my real name, and you can get regular updates on all my reviews and all of Geek.com's other great content by signing up for their kick-ass newsletter at subscribe.geek.com. And don't forget to also subscribe to the Geek.com YouTube channel, where you'll find the videos that accompany my reviews and tons of other great content too. Remember, that's Geek.com, the Geek.com newsletter, and Geek.com on YouTube. Make sure you don't miss out on all the latest MovieBob reviews. You can also check out my own new website, MovieBob Central, where you'll find my blog, links to all my work, and shop for my books, ebooks, and future MovieBob products. And please remember to like these videos, share them with all of your friends, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching another MovieBob production.